Vanessa drove to Gulfstream Trust Bank in downtown Coral Heights to withdraw money for a real estate deal that was scheduled to close next week. Her firm, Carter Wealth Partners, managed millions through that bank, and such visits had long been routine for her. Her intuition told her that this day would be out of the ordinary, however, and she adjusted her sunglasses, glancing up at the glass front of the building. At the end of the story, leave your opinion below, and don't forget to subscribe, and we'll continue. Inside, the bank was businesslike quiet. Tellers behind armored glass served customers, the air conditioners hummed to keep them cool, and the marble floor glistened beneath her heels. Vanessa approached the counter, handing her ID and withdrawal form to a young cashier named Emily, whose eyes widened when she saw the name. Emily, a pale girl in her early 20s, froze, looked at Vanessa, then at the document, and her gaze lingered too long. Vanessa, whose dark skin contrasted with the bright lights of the room, noticed Emily whisper something to the man behind her back, a clear sign that a simple operation was about to get complicated. The man, Leonard Hayes, the branch manager, thin, with thinning hair and a sour expression, stepped forward, adjusting his tie as if preparing for an interrogation. He took the papers and studied them with exaggerated care, as if looking for an excuse to refuse. "Ms. Carter, right?" he asked, his voice oozing disbelief despite the obvious evidence in front of him. Vanessa tilted her head slightly, her tone remaining even but firm. "Dr. Carter, to be exact. I'm here to withdraw the money." Leonard squeezed out a smile that didn't touch his eyes, and that falsity only heightened her suspicions. "You see," he began, slowly flipping through the papers, his fingers lingering on each page, "the amount is large, and we need to check some details." Vanessa raised an eyebrow, her patience beginning to melt. She'd withdrawn similar amounts here before, and no one had asked questions. "I've done it many times in this branch," she replied, her voice still calm, but there was already a note of challenge in it. Leonard remained silent, tapping his pen on the counter, a sound that only emphasized the growing tension between them. She rested her hand on the counter, her dark eyes fixed on Leonard, demanding explanation or action, and in that moment she realized it wasn't about the papers. Vanessa, a dark-skinned woman in an expensive suit, was standing in front of him, and that in itself made him uncomfortable, a prejudice he didn't even try to hide. "We need time to check in, nothing personal, just rules," he said, but his tone hinted otherwise. Vanessa exhaled slowly, feeling a wall grow between them, not of the bank's policies, but of his own stereotypes. She had come here for her money, but now she was going to face more than just a delay. "Doctor." Vanessa Carter stood at the counter of Gulfstream Trust Bank, her dark eyes following Leonard Hayes' every move. She, a dark-skinned woman whose firm, Carter Wealth Partners, was making millions for the bank, felt the air around her thicken with tension. Leonard, the manager with the strained smile, was going through her paperwork with such slowness, as if he hoped to find even the slightest clue for a rejection. "The inspection will only take a minute," he said, but his look said something else. He was looking for a reason to question her right to be here. Vanessa pressed her lips together, trying to remain calm, though irritation at his obvious prejudice was already boiling up inside. Emily, the cashier, stepped back, casting a quick glance at Leonard, as if expecting him to reassure how to deal with this problem customer. Vanessa noticed her ID card being passed from hand to hand, as if it itself made these men suspicious. "I've withdrawn sums like this before without any delays," she said, her voice still even, but there was already steel coming through. Leonard shrugged, not taking his eyes off the papers, and mumbled something about updated rules that supposedly required extra steps. His words sounded hollow, like an excuse made up on the fly to mask the real reason for his actions. Around them, life in the bank went on as usual. The white man in the crumpled shirt received a wad of cash and left without a single question. Vanessa, a dark-skinned woman in a strict suit, stood still, feeling the eyes of the employees clinging to her as if she were a stranger in their world. "How much longer do we have to wait?" she asked, crossing her arms, her tone sharper, demanding some sort of coherent answer from Leonard. He raised his head, his eyes narrowed, and he replied, "We're just protecting the bank's interests and customers from possible risks." That risks hung in the air, and Vanessa realized he was referring to her, the dark-skinned woman who had dared to ask for her own money. Leonard nodded to Emily, and she hurried off to side office, carrying Vanessa's paperwork while the manager remained at the counter, pretending to be busy. Vanessa felt time dragging agonizingly slow, each minute underscoring the injustice she faced because of the color of her skin. She knew it wasn't just bureaucracy, it was racism disguised as formality, and she wasn't going to tolerate it in silence. Dr. Vanessa Carter stood motionless at the counter of Gulfstream Trust Bank, her dark eyes watching Leonard Hayes' every move with cold concentration. She, the dark-skinned woman who had built Carter Wealth Partners from the ground up, was used to implicit biases, but today they were coming out all too clearly. Leonard, the manager with the strained smile, continued to stall, poring over her paperwork as if looking for a non-existent error to justify his distrust. "The check is almost complete," he lied, his voice shaking with poorly concealed tension as he avoided her gaze. Vanessa clenched her fists, her patience cracking at the seams, but she held herself in check, knowing her emotions would play against her. Emily returned from the office, her face paler than usual, and she handed the papers to Leonard with a nervous nod. Vanessa noticed the guard, a stout man with a stony expression, move closer to the counter, his hand resting on his walkie-talkie. "Are you calling security for a routine withdrawal?" she asked, her voice cutting the air, emphasizing the absurdity of the situation. Leonard coughed, feigning surprise, and replied, "It's a standard precaution for large sums of money, nothing personal." But Vanessa knew. The white man who'd walked away with the cash 5 minutes ago had not been honored with such attention. She stepped closer to the counter, her dark skin glistening under the light of the lamps, and her presence became an almost palpable threat to Leonard. "If there's a problem with my account, tell me right now," she demanded, her words sounding like an order rather than a request. Leonard faltered, his fingers drumming on the desk, and he squirmed. "We have an obligation to eliminate fraud. It's bank policy." The word fraud hit her like a slap, and she realized he didn't see her as a customer, but as a stereotype based on her race. Vanessa straightened, her gaze piercing Leonard, and she said, "You didn't check the other clients so thoroughly." The tension in the room thickened, the guard took a step forward, and Emily backed away, as if afraid to get between them. She, a dark-skinned woman with millions in her account, had crossed an invisible line in their eyes, and now they were ready to prove that she didn't belong here. Dr. Vanessa Carter stood at the counter of Gulfstream Trust Bank, her dark eyes drilling Leonard Hayes with growing determination. She, whose Carter Wealth Partners' financial empire backed this bank, felt humiliation turn to anger under their gaze. Leonard, the manager with the tortured smile, continued to stall, going through her paperwork as if he hoped she'd give up and leave. "We're waiting for confirmation from a security department," he said, his voice quivering with feigned confidence, but his eyes betrayed fear. Vanessa clenched her jaw, her patience wearing thin, and she knew this wasn't a test, but an attempt to put her in her place. The guard, a massive man with a stern face, now stood 3 paces away, his hand still resting on the walkie-talkie, ready to intervene. Emily, the cashier, avoided looking at Vanessa, her fingers nervously rubbing the edge of the table as she waited for instructions. "How much longer do we have to wait for your so-called confirmation?" Vanessa asked, her voice turning icy, emphasizing the absurdity of their actions against her. Leonard shrugged, muttering, "It may take a few minutes, standard procedure for such sums." But Vanessa saw the white woman in the business suit just walk away with the large sum without a single delay. She, a dark-skinned woman in an immaculate blazer, felt the staff's gazes clinging to her as if she were not a customer but a threat. "You haven't kept others waiting this long," she said, stepping closer, her tone as sharp as a blade. Leonard faltered, his fingers frozen over the papers, and he squirmed. "We're just following the rules to protect all customers." That all sounded like a sneer, and Vanessa realized her race was the only reason she was stuck here. Vanessa pulled her phone out of her pocket. Her movements were abrupt, and she began dialing a number without taking her eyes off Leonard. The guard tensed, stepping even closer, and Leonard asked, "What are you doing? Won't that help speed things up?" She raised her hand, silencing him, and said, "I'm tired of your games. Time to call it a day." The phone rang, and the voice on the other end answered instantly, the first step to turning this situation around. "Doctor." Vanessa Carter clutched the phone tightly at the counter of Gulfstream Trust Bank, her dark eyes blazing with a determination that could not be resisted. She wasn't going to take any more humiliation from Leonard Hayes. The voice on the other end of the line, deep and confident, belonged to James Ridley, the regional director who knew her not only as a client, but as a friend. "James, it's Vanessa. I have a problem in Coral Heights," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, drawing stares all around. Leonard froze, his fake smile faltering as he realized the game wasn't changing in his favor. I'm trying to withdraw money, but the manager is holding me up for no reason, she continued, deliberately loud, so that everyone could hear her accusation. James responded instantly, his tone becoming serious. Give me the manager's name. I'll deal with it right now. Vanessa looked at Leonard, whose skin had gone pale, and said, It's Leonard Hayes, he's implying fraud. The word fraud hung in the air, and the guard standing nearby dropped his hand from his walkie-talkie, suddenly realizing his mistake. She, a dark-skinned woman in an expensive suit, had turned their prejudice into a weapon that would now fall upon themselves. Leonard stepped forward, his voice shaking as he tried to excuse himself. Dr. Carter, it's just a formality. We didn't mean to offend you. Vanessa held out the phone to him, her movement sharp and commanding, and said, James wants to speak to you. Explain your formalities to him. He took the phone with trembling fingers, said, Hello, James, and immediately fell silent, listening to his confidence crumble under the pressure of the words on the other end. Vanessa crossed her arms, watching his face stretch, and Emily, the cashier, backed up against the wall, afraid to meet her gaze. After a minute, Leonard handed the phone back, his voice quieter. Your money will be ready in a second. Vanessa smiled, but it wasn't kindness, it was a victory forged from their racism that he couldn't hide. She knew this was just the beginning. Leonard would still regret his choice. Dr. Vanessa Carter stood at the counter of Gulfstream Trust Bank, her dark eyes sparkling with triumph as Leonard Hayes fidgeted with giving orders. She just made him sag under the pressure of her call. Emily, the cashier, was now hurriedly counting money, her fingers trembling as she stacked the bundles into Vanessa's leather folder. Leonard tried to save face, muttering, All set, Dr. Carter. Sorry for the misunderstanding. But Vanessa knew. It wasn't a misunderstanding, it was racism he was trying to disguise as rules, and she wasn't going to forgive him. She picked up the money folder, her movements slow and sure, emphasizing her control over the situation. Mr. Hayes, she began, her voice cutting the air, causing everyone in the room to freeze. Let's be clear about what happened here. Leonard swallowed, his eyes racing, but he didn't have time to object when she continued. You detained me not because of the amount, but because of the way I look. Her dark skin, her expensive suit, her confidence, all of it apparently didn't fit his idea of who such money belonged to. The guard, who had earlier threatened to intervene, now stared at the floor, realizing he'd picked the wrong side. My firm made millions for this bank, she said, her words falling like stones, crushing his excuses. But you decided that a dark-skinned woman of such means was suspicious, she added, and the silence in the room became deafening. Vanessa pulled out her phone again, but this time she didn't call James. She opened the app and started recording. I want this to be a lesson to everyone, she announced, her voice firm as she looked directly at Leonard. She turned to leave, but didn't leave, casting one last glance at him. Your bosses will find out soon enough. Leonard turned pale, realizing his career was hanging by a thread, and Vanessa was already planning her next move. Vanessa Carter stepped toward the Gulfstream Trust Bank exit, her dark eyes shining with unyielding confidence as she clutched the leather money folder. She'd left Leonard Hayes in the dust of his own prejudices. The Miami sun greeted her with warm rays, reflecting off the glass doors that slammed shut behind her with a symbolic clatter. Vanessa paused for a moment, pulling out her phone to send a recording of the incident to social media with the caption, Racism in the bank is real. Her fingers moved quickly, and she knew this message would spread like wildfire, exposing the injustice. Inside the bank, the whispers had already begun. Customers and employees were glancing over, discussing how the manager had failed under her pressure. Leonard stood at the counter, his face gray, and his hands shaking as he realized his career was crumbling because of one bad decision. Vanessa, the dark-skinned woman he dared to question, hadn't just walked away with the money she'd taken his reputation with her. She remembered how he'd hinted at fraud, how the guard had approached threateningly, and how her race had been the sole reason for their suspicions. It's not just about money, she thought as she stepped toward her infinity, her posture remaining impeccable despite the experience. It's about someone who has to prove their right to be here, she added to herself, knowing her story would inspire others. Vanessa got into her car, turned on the engine, and cast one last look at the bank where her victory was a lesson to all. Her phone vibrated with the first responses online, and she smiled. The world now knew she couldn't be treated like this. She left, leaving behind not only the building, but the stereotypes that try to hold her back. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. If you like the story, please give this video a thumbs up